us who saw the shocking violence of January 6th at the US Capitol knew then and there that American democracy was in clear peril. But the sheer spectacle of that moment can be misleading. It can lead us to lose sight of how the attack on the US Capitol was just the culmination of a long, slow-moving campaign against our democracy, not just through violence, but also through law. I want to untangle one thread in that campaign. My story is about how an institution that we look to as a guardian of the rule of law, the courts, can be turned into an instrument for corroding our democracy. At the beginning of our republic, the framers of the Constitution created a third unelected branch to our national government called the federal courts. Their aim in so doing was, importantly, to bolt in a safeguard against the misuse of public power by elected politicians. Despite that important and noble aspiration, those federal courts have never been able to fully escape the pull of partisan gravities. They've never been able to properly do their job. Now, it might seem there's something paradoxical, even dangerous, about speaking of judges as a threat to democracy. Yet, in the early 21st century, there has been a sea change in the nature of the threat to democracy around the world. Once, it was the military coup or the declaration of emergency that was used to etch out the edge to self-rule. Today, democracy's enemies have found ways to turn the institutions and the laws that are necessary for self-rule against the project of democracy. From Venezuela to Hungary, from Turkey to Poland, democratic backsliding now happens through law, not against it, with the courts, not against them. This is no less true in the United States. It's not just a matter of throwing the occasional presidential election, as happened in Florida in 2000, as almost happened in Pennsylvania in 2020. The Supreme Court has undermined key safeguards for free and fair elections. The court has gutted the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and it has hollowed out our constitutional right to vote. As a result, states have been able to enact a slew of voter suppression measures, leading many to lose the franchise. The justices have also consistently blocked campaign finance laws, which are aimed at preventing the capture of our representative bodies by wealthy elites. And at the same time that the wealthy have received a leg up, the court has consistently stood in the way of working class efforts to organize politically through labor unions. How could this be? In 1787, when the framers sat down to create a system of independent courts, they didn't have a model to emulate. The British courts were firmly under the thumb of the king. Yes, there were colonial courts along the Atlantic seaboard, but these were weak and partial things. So the framers had to do something for the very first time in Western political history. They had to figure out from scratch how to make judges independent. And they chose to do that through one means and decided not to use other possible ways. They chose to give judges, as individuals, a protection against retaliation after the fact through salary and tenure protections. But they also chose to run the process of judicial appointment through the Senate and the presidency. That's the same channel that's used to make political appointments, like cabinet secretaries or ambassadors. Now, the framers reasoned that political appointment posed no threat to judicial integrity for two reasons. First, they expected the President and the Senate to stand above the fray of factional battle. They thought that those national bodies would, like a sieve, strain out the impurities of naked self-interest. Second, at the end of the 18th century, there were far fewer lawyers on the ground than there are today. And the framers saw this, and they reasoned that the president, when making appointments to the bench, simply would not be able to cherry-pick ideological allies. And on these assumptions, the design for judicial independence would work. In hindsight, we can see that those assumptions faltered. And they faltered precisely because of the framers' success in building a new nation. So first, the framers built a new national politics with new national political parties. Not all presidents, as a result, would stand above the fray in the fashion of George Washington. Not every representative would put their country above their party, let alone the physical safety of their colleagues. Second, the framers seeded a continent-wide economy, which led to a massive growth in the number of lawyers, for better or for worse. Whatever constraints they had imagined limited the supply of legal talent quickly became a thing of the past. Paradoxically then, the framers' very success in building a new nation undermined their design for judicial independence. What this means is that the path to the federal bench has always been open to partisan politics. Now, the threat to democracy from the judiciary seems more acute now than in the past. How could that be? Well, the short answer is that we have become far more polarized as a nation since the 1990s. For much of the 20th century, bipartisan cooperation was the norm. Laws would get passed, the president could implement them without being fought tooth and nail, and judicial confirmation hearings were sleepy affairs. Today, gridlock is the norm on Capitol Hill, at best. If you want to get policy change, often the only pathway is through judicial fiat. And in that world, the stakes of each judicial confirmation hearing become sky high. Now, in that world, it makes no sense to honor the framers through a blind deference to history. Remember that the 1787 Philadelphia Convention did something for the first time. They broke the mold by creating the world's first democratic constitution. Its leaders, people like James Madison, were enlightened rationalists who never would have stopped with just a diagnosis of why judicial independence was flawed. They would have tried to remedy it. Now, Congress and the media echo with proposals for fixing the courts. Term limits, additional seats to the bench, ethics codes, all of these are proposed. And there's a lot to be said for and against many of these ideas. But none of them cut to the heart of the problem. That is the way that our judicial appointment system creates predictable, powerful incentives for political actors, elected politicians, to try to capture the courts. The fix is not rocket science. Many other nations have ways of appointing judges that do not involve politicians. The citizens of those countries understand how important that insulation from politics is, and they are even willing to go to the streets to defend it. Now, our system of appointing judges cannot be changed without amending the text of the Constitution. For many, this will seem politically infeasible. But it might be that we don't have a choice in the matter. As we all sit here today, 28 states have already passed resolutions calling for a new constitutional convention under Article 5 that would reconsider root and branch our basic law. So, the moment of massive, full-scale constitutional change may well be closer than any of us would like to think. Yet, perhaps we should welcome that window as an opportunity to get things right, to make our courts better. We have a chance to keep faith with the framers' core aspiration, self-rule under law, at a moment when our democracy is threatened by violence and shadowed by the misuse of law. Yet we show fidelity to the framers only by pushing past the understandable historic limits to their design. For we can find at its core, the framers' Constitution has in it a living wisdom, a wisdom that can transcend our warring tribes and the violent troubles of our time, if only we have the courage to seize it. Thank you.